Hey, Danielle, thanks for joining today.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, I am excited to talk about creativity within what you do in your work world or your entire environment.
Mhm.
And I'd like to start out the conversation with now, when I met you, my understanding is you're a ghostwriter. So, I would like to actually start in that window because that really fascinates me. And one of the things I was thinking about, and maybe I'm wrong, so you tell me what you think about this, but I kind of view this as that you have somebody who wants to express either a story, a biography, a thought process, something. They have this spark. And I would imagine, I shouldn't group people and say your average person. It's probably not fair. But I would say a lot of people probably, or how about this? Myself, I'm a scatterbrain. I'm like, I got all these great ideas. I don't know how to put them together. So I would come to somebody like you and be like, how do I coalesce, put something intentional together? And for me, I'd be like, I don't even know where to start. In kind of that window, where we begin this conversation, do you have an initiating point or a methodology, or do you have a bit of thought around this? Because you probably experienced this quite a few times.
Every time I get on a call and somebody tells me about their book idea or their thought leadership platform or what they want to do with their creative energy, it always boils down to their time and energy and resources. And from there, we have a conversation about how they want to spend their time and energy.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
one of the ways that we start talking about that creative process is to narrow down the reasoning as to why they want to write this book or why they want to increase their thought leadership platform, what their hopes and dreams are, and what's preventing them from doing it themselves, what type of support they feel they need in order to make this a reality. And believe it or not, most individuals who do come to me are like you in terms of what you just said. And they will say, I don't have time to do this, or I have no idea how to organize all of these thoughts in my head.
Yeah.
Most of my book coaching clients come from that direction where they want to write the book and they want to have their voice as their own. And a ghostwriter can emulate somebody's voice, a good ghostwriter can, that is. However, some people really want to have the book written on their own with the help of a coach.
Interesting. Yeah.
And what I do in a book coaching capacity that deals with creativity and deals with creative energy is how to organize somebody's creative process and how to organize their thoughts. The other day, I had a conversation about, and I actually posted about this on multiple social media platforms about the idea of being in your creative flow and energy and not shutting that down to switch to your logical brain for research purposes. So
Mm.
instead of switching back and forth, you write a comment to yourself or you highlight a certain paragraph. And one really important tip is if you find yourself wanting to write many or most individuals, or most of the time this happens, many people feel this way about this subject, then that's your indication that you want to have some other logical entity to back that up, whether it's your own credibility and your own advice based on your experiences, or it's some statistic from some reliable source.
There's so in there, you said something along the lines of pull on this thread a little bit and just see where it goes. But there's the different types. There's basically, there was one that was more or less, they really want to write it and it's the coaching.
Mhm.
Then the other was really aiding in the process, have a much more heavy handed, or but you would be malleable to form around it. But I think the thread I was trying to pull out was really thinking about that with the logic base to the creative thought, like the research. When I say logic, I'm referencing you mentioned the research portion of it.
Mhm.
So that research portion of it is pulling in different influences, different data points, or different whatever that form is around what they're trying to communicate. But then the creative aspect of it is that's, I would imagine it's almost them trying to tie those things together through their own voice or their own expression or an own interpretation of it. And I guess, have you seen, is that, Are some people able to kind of balance in that world, play in that world better than others? Or I guess that's a judgment thing to say it's better than others. But are there people that can balance well into the research logic and also maintain that a little bit of a creative flow in there?
No, I don't believe that it's easy to switch between
Mm-hmm.
those two parts of your brain, because what happens is when you're in a creative flow state, you're in that flow state for a certain length of time. It really varies based on the person. It also varies based on what food you're eating, based on how much water you're drinking. There's all these things that deal with our energy we don't think about, that actually
Yeah.
deal with our creative process and our flow quite significantly. Because if you're feeling fatigued after 10 minutes of writing, then is it really because you're fatigued from the subject matter itself? Or
Mm,
are you fatigued from something else that's outside of you? And that's really what I think is so fascinating about thinking about creativity in terms of the writing process, because when we're writing and when we're in that flow state and when that creative energy is flowing, we're usually really happy to be there, right?
oh, absolutely.
If you want
Yeah.
that, if you're interested in writing about that subject, then that flow state can last for quite a long time. I know for me, when I'm writing, I do a really good 90-minute segments. That's
How
a
much?
really
Okay.
good time for me. And I always tell people, I recommend time yourself and see how long. Don't look at the timer necessarily, but when you start feeling that fatigue, start looking at the timer and see approximately how long it's been. I did that multiple times, numerous different occasions on different projects, and it was always right around an hour and a half that I
Oh my gosh,
felt.
that's
That's,
cool. You've
yeah,
discovered that little bit of a code for yourself.
exactly. But I think everybody can do that. And that's one of the things I always tell. That's partially that logical part that I always talk about in my coaching and in my ghostwriting process is you have to understand what your rhythm is with your creative flow, because otherwise we have no idea how to time your project. Absolutely no idea. If you have
Oh,
no idea how long it's going to take you to write a LinkedIn post, and you have no idea how long it's going to take you to write a chapter after the outline. That's a whole other discussion on how to write a book and what to do first, second, and third. And we can get into that at some point or in a different discussion.
sure.
But I really emphasize the understanding those flow states in your creative zone of genius and understanding what your relationship is with writing creativity, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does make sense. I think there's also a mindset too. I've heard this before. Is I say this reluctantly, but almost a discipline of creativity. So if you show up and it's probably similar. Let's just associate it with even like a working out. You're showing up every day at the same time. I think that your mind, maybe you've created a safe space. You've created that intention. Your mind, your body knows you're going to go there. And I think there is even I've quoted it before in another episode, and I wish I could find the quote quick, but I don't know if I can, but it was basically something along the line. It was a writer, and it was something along the lines of my creative space starts at, or I get my creative space every day, but thankfully it starts at 9 a.m. or something like that. But that, I think the essence of that is that there is an intention and you can build disciplines around it. I imagine, which you really touched on something too, is really just even a holistic mind body connection point, mind body spirit always, but is with your environment and your internal environment, the water, the food, and which makes complete sense. It's, I don't think people give it enough weight because it's almost so common sense. If you eat garbage food right before you sit down, and
Right.
you're going to have some fatigue, from some physical fatigue in that arena with that creative flow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that discipline window is. How about this for you? I'll ask this kind of yourself. If you're writing for yourself versus if you're writing for somebody else, and I do want to add something to it before you answer, is I know that when I'm writing almost for somebody else, because of business consulting or sales or some capacity in that, I I'll go on a limb. I'll just say I feel like some of my writing is like genius level when I'm writing for somebody else. When I go to write for myself, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know if the stakes are higher or something. Like But I guess for yourself, because you have dedicated so much time to writing as a career path, do you notice a big difference in those windows for yourself or for somebody else?
That's a really great question. And I don't think I've ever been asked that before. So great job. I feel more pressure when I'm writing for somebody else because I
Okay.
know that there's more of a specific deadline. If I'm working on parts of my book or I'm working on LinkedIn posts or some other type of content, it comes really easily and naturally to me. It's funny to me when I have clients and other people who say, oh, it takes me 3 hours to write 500 words. And to me, it takes almost no time at all. It's because I write all the time, and that's how I utilize my creative energy. I like to also think of creativity as a muscle, right? It's a
Mhm.
muscle that if we're not going to use it, it's like a language. If you learn a language when you're young and you don't use it, you lose it.
Yep.
And I think of different facets of creativity in that same way, where if you're not using those different muscle groups on a regular basis, that it's not to say they're not there, they don't exist, but they're just at a lower grade level than maybe they were 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So if you were an A student in every single class and you went into the sciences and you have taken an English class and you are very research heavy in your day and say, oh, I know how to write, but then you go and you try to write something and it takes you a significant period of time because you haven't exercised that muscle in
Sure.
many years. When it comes to my writing, I get really excited because it's almost like it's a treat for me to be able to write for myself. Not that I don't get excited about my client work, because that's why I take on the clients that I take on because I love their projects and I care about their projects just as much as they do or more,
Yeah.
because that's why they come to me because they need that encouragement and they want that help. And I love having those conversations and being able to help my clients in different ways and capacities. But it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to sit and be in my own creative flow zone for myself. And it is a different energy that comes with that. And I think part of that is the idea that you take care of yourself in other ways, right? And about a year ago, I started a brand new routine for myself where I would get up really early in the morning and I call myself, I'm a 5:15 a.m.er now at the gym that I go to. And it really sets my day to be able to concentrate and give all of my creative energy to my clients and myself and be
Yeah.
able to know how to divvy that throughout the day. And I think it's really because I give to myself. It's almost like the idea of filling your own cup first and that whole thing. I think that's really important to be able to do that when you're in a creative space.
Yeah. You use the word give, and I really like that because that's an interesting thing. You are giving a form of your creativity, your abilities, and just really that expertise that you've built on over the years, which is interesting because now I have this reflection. I always associate creativity personally with almost, I'm not going to say a selfish aspect of creativity, but it's a very internalized sense of creativity. But now that I think about it, when we put expression out there, or if in that case, like I said, if I'm writing in a business capacity or writing for a company or doing something along those lines or communicating, I guess that really is a form of transferring the creative message, the creative thought process, the highlighting of the best components of it. So I guess there really is a sense of giving in there. It's really interesting. So thank you for, you didn't know that unintentionally, but I actually changed a little bit of perspective I had on creativity. I felt like it was a very
Mm.
internalized thing that yes, you give it away, but what you're doing is you're performing your creative powers in the capacity of somebody else and giving them to that. And that's an interesting and powerful thing with the ghostwriter.
Yeah. And another thing I was thinking about as you were talking about giving creativity as in my job as a ghostwriter and emulating somebody else's voice. And I think there are a lot of other ways of giving creativity. You can give creativity in an art class, you can give
Mhm.
creativity when you're playing with children. You can give
Mm.
creativity in the kitchen. I like to cook, for instance, and make my own food and do lots of different types of recipes. And I feel like that's a form of creativity that
Yep.
you could do for yourself and you also do for others. And I really like that interpretation, though, and thinking of it as both giving and receiving, right? Because it's really that you're able to give, but then you feel really great when you give a great creative product or service to another individual or entity.
Yeah, I think even too, I like that. We'll build up on this, but I have used that example as far as like creativity and the cooking and making your children Mickey Mouse shaped pancakes. There is a creativity to that because it brings a smile to their face.
Right?
There's a little bit of a brightening and a lightening and picking up the energy for them. So of course, there's the return to in turn for that. And I actually think on a really big perspective, well, big, small, whatever in the scope, but I really don't believe creativity is necessarily in a vacuum. And I'm still working through some of these thoughts in my head, but it really has no end and no beginning. And it's always being transferred, transmuted, transported through each of us. And each of us are so unique. We're our own filters. So that gets carried on through and how it's interpreted. So you write something, I'm going to read that. Maybe my wife's going to read it, somebody else is going to read it, and maybe the message you conveyed is very specific, but we're still going to have a different interpretation or a different association with that. So that those creative processes, the beauty of creativity is because it's not always fixed; it's how it's received on a larger scale. And then it exchanges and it moves on through the next person. So it's some of the beauty, I think, of the even just the idea for me of creativity is it just it expands beyond the scope of a one stop of just an exchange. And I think that's some of the inspiring around it. And you touched on that point again. I'll go back to the cooking, but I see creativity and genius in the mundane, the things we do daily. And I've seen it in many different companies, have a lot of different doors and windows in the different types of businesses and people that have been doing something for many years. And the way they do it really is there's a sense of like genius in there. They've created their own personal touch into something and they don't think anything of it. They don't even notice it. But there is a beauty and a creativity in that. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that and pulling that back there. Just kind of rounded out that thought process
Yeah.
nicely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, the one of it too is actually a little bit outside of the creative. It was maybe this is more of a writing thing when you're talking about say prose and working with somebody specifically. And I guess the voice is there much of maybe this is my me not understanding writing. So just bear with me here. Is there an association with somebody's voice and prose and just speaking or just writing in those styles, or is it a little bit more nuanced and unique when you're taking on somebody's voice?
It's really interesting to think about this. I do get asked quite often how to emulate and be somebody else's voice. And the thing to think about is that a lot of personal growth, personal development books these days, even business books, thought leadership books, a lot of them used to be written and we used to think of writing very differently than speaking.
Mm,
And nowadays, there are so many programs that you can go, you can search, oh, speak your book in a weekend and all this. And yeah, can you do that? Sure. But the way somebody reads or the way somebody listens to your book is not going to be the same way as they'll listen to you as a speaker necessarily, because when you're speaking about a subject, it's a lot shorter of a period of time than the content that makes up the book, right? So,
okay.
is speaking your book a great way of starting a draft? Yes, I think so. I think
Okay.
it can be really helpful because you can get the bones of what you want to say by speaking. So, some of my clients, especially in a coaching capacity, if they're trying to write and they're coming to a roadblock multiple times and they are finding it difficult to move past this particular point, I will tell them go for a walk and bring a journal or bring your phone, turn off all notifications, open up a voice app and voice record your thoughts about this particular roadblock and why this is happening, what happens before, and what needs to happen after.
Is that to take them out of the environment?
Yes, absolutely. And think about how often we stare at the computer screen as
For sure.
well. And there are a lot of studies about handwriting your thoughts and how
Yeah, for sure.
handwriting is actually can be more beneficial for your memory for memorization than typing
Okay.
something.
I've had that experience too. If I'm speaking about something or trying to convey, even just in a small meeting,
Yeah.
I write those bullet points out. They do sink in, just definitely more secure, deeper point anchor points on that.
Yeah, exactly. So I really think there are always multiple ways of looking at any situation. And what I like doing is trial and error
Hmm.
on how to be able to utilize the individual's creative process. And a lot of times, what happens too, and this happened today earlier with one of my coaching clients, that we were talking about changing the title, and she was gung ho about this one title since we met several months ago. And lately, she's just decided this is actually going to be this way instead. And I said, yeah, that fits a lot better. And I
Yeah,
like that better. But that wouldn't have happened without us talking about her creative process in understanding what she really wanted to say.
yeah. You know what I like about that too is that there's so many things just in life, period, like that. So she had that. I want to assume anything, but I would imagine she was had that title. There was an inspirational she had. So she was like so
Yeah.
inspired about that title.
Yeah.
And then she changed it in the end, but what that was a catalyst. That was potentially spurred her on to be like, that's the title. I want to build around this. And then you form it and you just go on. And that's also nice because in this case, she wasn't so rigid about it. And that creative or whatever she built in that storyline or whatever the book is about, the realization of later of what the true value of the message was, but in changing that title. So I
Right.
think there's a life lesson in that is sometimes the inspiration or the excitement is just a catalyst. It's not necessarily the end of the journey.
Right.
So
That's true. That's
yeah,
always the case. Yeah. And it's also feeling comfortable and confident that this is a creative journey that somebody is on with whatever they happen to be writing. And the other thing to think about with writing anything is it's not going to be perfect, and that's also okay, right?
yeah,
So it's letting go of the idea of others judging your own creativity about a subject that you want to write about. If you want to write a LinkedIn post and you're spending 3 hours trying to write 500 words or 200 words, whatever it is, like check why you feel it's taking you that long to do that. And I do have clients who tell me this. It's not their strong suit. Writing is just
yeah,
not their strong suit. They utilize their creative flow and energy in other ways. And that is okay. And that's really good that those people know that about themselves. But if you're saying, oh, I have to be able to do this for whatever reason, allow yourself to say it's okay to have that not be your creative flow or your creative way of expressing yourself. You might need help with that. And that's
yeah.
okay.
Absolutely. I think having the courage to admitting that, I think we try to be all things, I mean, not everybody, but many times we try to be all things to all people.
Right.
And we're not being effectively within the windows that we're even comfortable with. And I firmly believe it stretch us. You always stretch yourself, try, get yourself
Sure.
uncomfortable, take yourself out of the environment,
Sure.
100%. Explore those ends of that. And there are no limits. But there's
Right.
sometimes that you're adapted and acclimated. And how about just a straight up desire or flow state? Your ability is that's okay. Have great, and you said it, have grace with yourself. Don't be hard on yourself if this isn't your outlet. That's
Yeah.
okay.
And it's always okay to express yourself and say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see how it goes. And
Yeah.
it's also okay to be courageous and say, you know what? I am not great in the kitchen, and this is not how I want to express my creative energy. And I'm going to get a meal delivery service for
Yeah.
6 months or whatever.
How hard I try, this just isn't working, and I keep
Right,
trying, but it just doesn't feel right and good, you know? So,
right.
I think there's a real personal power, I think, that sometimes people don't recognize, and they keep trying to force things on themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And
Uh,
it's okay to say no to something and then
yeah,
say yes to something that really lights you up creatively.
yeah,
Because once that lights you up creatively, then you can really make magic happen. And it's really beautiful.
yeah. I would even translate into business as well too, in maybe like a small organization, people working within their strengths and trying to take on too much and not knowing how to delegate, reallocate, or even to solopreneurs or when to hire like a assistant or something along those lines, because then you can be doing the work that you really enjoy or you're
Right.
good at, you excel at, because that's what's really going to expand and accelerate your environment.
And
Uh,
people don't think about it like that. People are like, oh,
right.
I'm going to spend money on this. I'm going to spend money on that. And it's like, yes,
Yeah.
but if you don't do that, then what happens? You'll spend 3 hours writing that LinkedIn post, right?
100%. Absolutely. And you'll have a analysis paralysis or perfectionism or whatever version of that is for you. So I would imagine you probably see a lot of perfectionism in there with some of that stuff. I could also see too, I'm thinking about it on the flip side, and without going too far into it, there were some studies done, and people's attention span is less than a goldfish at this point because of so much influence and everything else. And
Yeah.
I also say too, where you have so much coming at us now, or there's the shorts of the videos and the short, quick whips of writing and content and tweets, that I think there's a couple different things with that. Is we don't have the one, we don't have the commitment of the attention span as much as globally. The other thing too is that the I don't want to call this the positive side, but at this day and age, I think people just have to, and it's not for me to tell somebody to let go of the perfectionism, but it's okay because let's face it, a lot of times it's going to get buried, and you post a
Mhm.
LinkedIn post and somebody's going to see it quickly, and there's going to be 1,000 other ones that are going to bury it fast. And
Yeah.
that cuts both ways. But at the same point too, I really think that there's a sense of having courage, just put it out there, put it out there. And the more you do that, the stronger you get, the voice is going to come out. If it's something you really want to work through and improve on, go for it.
Right.
Continue doing
Right.
that because you will get better at it. And the ones that you were embarrassed of will work their way through. So that commitment,
Right.
it's not a do or die. It's not like, if you don't write this article nicely, you're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. It's
Right.
just not going to happen. So I
Yeah.
would say, so there was one other thing too, is we touched on, it was in essence, we didn't use the word procrastination, but I think that ties in the perfectionism too, some of the
Mhm.
procrastinations. I also do think with that, there can be stalling. And I'm wondering too, if there's a tie in to some people's talents, because we talked about if that's not your window and you've really exhausted that aspect of it and it's just not resonating with you, then just
Yeah.
either hire it out or
Right.
find somebody that is their window. But I think procrastination in that sense does have a value because it is telling you there's an indicator there, there's an energetic indicator internally with you.
Yeah.
I think people put a bad connotation on that and maybe label themselves as a perfectionist, but it was a stalling because you're like, this just isn't, the gears aren't, it's not coming together. This isn't resonating with me. This isn't right. And maybe people put the, maybe capture it. So I think there's just an awareness and a mindfulness built around this is what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that maybe I'll go back to give yourself grace and don't beat yourself up. It might
Yeah.
not be, it might be perfectionism or it might be procrastination, but either
Right.
way, something's not quite lining up.
So I'll give my favorite tip if you are unsure. So in terms of when you feel that perfectionism coming on, or you feel like, oh, I don't know if my idea is good enough. And it is amazing to me how many high level, high achieving individuals I have heard say to me, especially in the last 6 months, even say, I just don't know if my idea is good enough. Will anybody read my
Oh,
book? And
mm,
it's so fascinating to me because yes, somebody will read your book. You will influence somebody's life from your stories. It's just a matter of you saying that you want to do it. So, my number one tip, if you're in that spot, is start telling people that you are going to write a book and
Yeah.
start telling them what you want to write about in a couple of sentences. Is it your life story? Is it a personal growth book? Is it a memoir about a very specific event that happened in your life? There's a lot of different, is it a novel? It could be a novel, right? It,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. But what matters is starting to verbalize what you want that creative process to look like, because then you're manifesting that. You're manifesting that creative energy that you will need in order to accomplish that goal.
Yeah. I wonder, is there a stat out there somewhere or some type of thought process of how many people don't actually finish or just dying to do it? Is there something out there in the sense of, because you touched on it, I don't think it's good enough, but they start. So there's so many people that start. So many people want to write a book. I believe
Mhm.
they do. I run across people that are like, nah, it's not my thing. But there's a lot of people that do want to write a book, and maybe they start, maybe they got an idea. Is there, I don't want to call it a success rate because maybe that's not the right
Yeah,
way to look at it, but I guess how many people are a percentage if you
yeah,
commit to it and
yeah.
make it all the way to the end?
Yeah. So I believe the New York Times did a study. This was a while ago. So I don't know the exact date and year. We can definitely look it up and find that information. But in the study, I recall it saying that over 80% of Americans want to write a book and only
Oh, wow.
5% do.
How much? What's the last percentage?
5%.
Oh my God, 5%.
5%.
Oh my God.
That stat
That's,
has stuck with me for many years
yeah.
because it's just incredible to me. And I really do believe that because I've talked to so many individuals as well who think about even recording stories of their grandparents or great grandparents and what happens when it's too late and you don't get those
Mm,
stories anymore. And
100.
that's a real life creative process to think about because we're all busy. We have so many things to do every single day. Everybody has a million alarms on their phones going off, as I do for various reasons. And it's really important to stop and think about not only where we came from, but what stories need to continue to live on in our families and in our cultures. I think that's really important.
No, I agree. I
Topic.
agree.
But I think I saw somebody post on a social media platform the other day saying something like, you don't want, oh, I should have recorded their
Yeah,
stories. And to me, I thought that was really powerful because
it
we
is.
don't get more time when the time is up. So, in terms of your creative energy, if you want those stories, go with your phone to your relative and start asking them those questions that you want to know and open up those doors, open up those windows. And there's a great website called Storyworth. I'm not an affiliate by any
Mhm.
means, but highly recommend it. It's great to be able to ask different questions of individuals in your families, just things that you didn't think about, like when did you get your first car, or what was your favorite ice cream shop when you were in elementary school? Just things that you may have never discussed with family members.
Yeah, and all those stories get lost. They just
Yeah,
get lost to time. And
yeah,
I think too, is you touched on it before, is my idea or is my story worth telling?
yeah,
And it is. There is recognition. There are people that they that there is a craving to be for the connection, the community, the identification, the understanding where people belong, or those similarities.
right,
So that's a really interesting, beautiful way to that is tell those, just to continue to tell those stories. And I
right.
guess figuring out where your outlet is, pulling it together on what media, because some of them might not be long too, and which would lead me to another question, because I actually have two more questions I can think of. Is one is the length, which I know I'm jumping from the one with the families, but because there's novella length, full novels, and I've done a bit of looking into this, 90,000 words, 30,000 words, ebooks are X number of thousand words length. Obviously, getting and conveying a story is one thing. I would imagine not being pinned to a length, but is there What is your kind of view on some of that as far as a length or a commitment to?
Yeah. So in this day and age, as you have mentioned, people's attention spans are like
Yeah.
goldfishes. So in terms of writing the next great novel, sure, if you believe that you have a good marketing platform and you know what you're doing marketing wise, which that's a whole other discussion with book and book sales and what the goals are for the book, all of that. Yes, can your novel be 100,000 words? Maybe. If we're talking about a nonfiction book, which is more of my specialty, and we're talking about a business book or thought leadership or personal growth, then they tend to be closer to 30,000 to 40,000 words. And
Okay.
I'm finishing up a ghostwriting project for a project that's they wanted between 10 and 15,000 words. This is a book for
Oh,
business
interesting.
that they
Yeah,
wanted. I truly believe that every CEO should have a book. A book can
I
be
agree.
10,000 to 15,000 words, and you can hire a ghostwriter for not a crazy amount of money, and you will make money. You will make that money back from speaking engagements, from course creation, from consulting agreements. And it just makes a lot of business sense for more businesses to get on board with having those books as products of their business.
Mhm. Okay. I really agree with you too, is I believe that C-level, the entrepreneur really should have kind of a book built around that, and not just an ebook, an actual extended version of that. And you know what? You sparked something in my head. I'm doing this creative series here, which thank you for coming on camera for. And I actually imagine if I do 30, 40 of these interviews about creativity, I think there's a book there.
1,000%. Absolutely.
And pulling those thought streams, the different perspectives, the influences,
Yeah.
and pulling those together, I think there'd be
Yeah.
really something potentially beautiful there.
Yeah. So we'll,
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. That might be a really cool little round out for this series. So we'll,
I
you know,
agree.
I'll keep that in mind. I really had one last question about it with, and because there's fiction and nonfiction, but closing loops, open loops, the human brain wants, craves closing the loop on thoughts. And I guess there is a difference between a to be continued or not. But I would imagine with your writing, I'm guessing, but you can tell me, is it really a lot of more of a closed loop type of writing style then at that point? We're finishing thoughts, we're closing ideas out. I guess we're putting methodology if we're talking about business oriented books. Is it more of a closed loop type of focus on that?
I
Or
would
are there open ended types of thoughts in this too?
There could be open ended in terms of what the book's goals are, right? So it goes back to what the book's goals are. And is this a business book that's going to have some questions at the end of each chapter that
I
address the
gotcha.
subject matter in those chapters? Will the book have a QR code leading back to a resources page on the author's website, which is something I recommend very often, more often than not, in order to keep the reader engaged with the material and with the business or the individual themselves. So I would say it really depends on the subject. It
Okay.
depends on,
That's fair.
yeah,
I think that's fair. I think there's also evoking an idea where you want to have somebody's mind expanded and creating their own thought processes around the modality or whatever your conveyance is. I do appreciate that answer because I don't think there's a hard line to it. I was just curious about the open loops, closed loops, because
yeah, yeah,
so it keeps them,
super
I
interesting.
don't want to say keeps them wanting more of the continued engagement, that the
Yeah,
concept there. I think that's a great way to do
yeah,
it. But perfect. Thank you so much for joining. This was great. And let's definitely do this again.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I appreciate it.
Perfect.